What's going on there, Film Fights with Friends fans? This is Paul Veracci.
And Stephen Kepper, your filmmaker, stunt people, hosts of this podcast.
That's right. That's what we are.
Yeah, that is what we are. Dude, sponsor spotlight. This is our first sponsor spotlight episode.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's so awesome.
Which is pretty cool since we're coming up towards the end of the first season here.
It's great that we finally get to bring on one of our sponsors. I didn't even realize that. That's
Yeah.
great you brought that up.
Yeah. Totally, man.
So in case you're wondering which one of your sponsors are we bringing on, we are bringing on Brett Copes from Fight or Flight Entertainment.
Yeah, man. We're going to be talking rigging.
We are going to be talking rigging, not necessarily breaking down a fight specifically, but we're just going to be talking about what it's like flying people.
Yeah.
Especially the difference between stage and film.
Yeah. I think it's a really cool conversation that we have.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we don't get deep into the weeds of how to rig or anything like that, but what we really do look at is like concepts.
Well, if you
right?
want to learn how to rig, you can always just hit up Brent and go to one of his workshops.
Yeah, totally. But yeah, conceptually how to approach the issue of rigging,
Mm-hmm.
right? And safety and all these other really important issues. And I love what he said there. He said it off camera.
Mm-hmm.
But he said you can't have secrecy and safety existing in the same world if you want your set to be safe.
Agreed.
You can't.
No.
Secrecy is the enemy of safety.
Everything needs to be transparent.
Yeah, totally. And I'm going to use that quote now from
That's
now on.
good.
It's a great one. But I love talking with Brett. He's awesome. And we do have our little friend that we're going to pop in and surprise him. Our little Mission Impossible monkey, Sakuraba. You know, we are doing rigging, so we got to have a little bit of fun with a wire.
That's awesome.
Anyway, dude, we've been asking people to review us, and we did get another review, and this one's on IMDb.
Yeah, we did. This is a nice review.
Yeah, I'm going to read it to you. And this is from our friend down in Austin, Lisa Mejia. She is from the I met her at the Iron Dragon Film Festival down there.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. But and this is what she writes, and it's really amazing, and we love you for taking the time to write this. Action Nerds Unite. This is becoming one of my favorite podcasts. I've loved action films since I was a child, and I've aged, and I've been lucky enough to know more and more about the culture of stunts. What's great about Film Fights with Friends is that it blends behind-the-scenes knowledge and film conversation. Martial art and stunt performers can be intimidating with their physical strength and general badassery. Well, at least one of us is badass. We'll let you guys figure it out. But general badassery. But Steve and Paul bring such a relaxed vibe to the podcast that intimidation goes away. It's also a great podcast to listen to at work because you can pause the mundane and view the action sequences they are linked and talk about, giving your day a bit of spice.
That's such a great review.
You're spicy, Paul.
I like that.
You are spicy. And she said, I was excited when I knew this was coming, and I'm not disappointed. Thanks, guys, for a great podcast, and we can't wait for more episodes.
That's awesome.
Thank you, down in Austin.
Thank you so much, Lisa.
We appreciate you. Bang. There goes. I'll do my Johnny Carson. David Letterman.
Cheers on our first IMDb review.
Yeah. We really do appreciate the reviews, folks. So if you are a fan of the show, wherever you are listening to us, whether it's on Apple, YouTube, Spotify, you name it, Amazon, like us, rate us, review us, make some comments if you can't review. Not every place lets you review, but you can make comments on Spotify and YouTube, and we will shout you out on the show for sure. Totally, man.
And if you're not a fan of the show, comment too. We welcome it.
Yeah, if you think we're full of shit.
If you think we're full of shit, just bring it on.
We're totally cool to read that too.
We're totally read it and have a good time.
Yeah, why not?
And even if you're one of our friends.
Yeah. A friend that once we say cut, we can call you up and say, fuck you, man. What the fuck you talking about? But hey, we've been plugging the Art of Movie Making Film Festival.
Yes.
And something cool is they are moving to a bigger, better venue.
Really?
So in order to do so, they've changed the dates. We've been telling everybody it's in June, but now it's moved to September.
Okay.
So everything else is the same. Still awesome film festival.
Mhm.
Still going to have a best stunt performance category, the winner of which will be on this show.
Just now in September.
But now it's in September,
Okay.
not June. We still have the Film Freeway link in our show notes. So if people want to submit a project or a scene, a stunt scene to this competition, or any other aspect of the crafts involved in filmmaking, right?
And this is a great film festival because it just really honors the you know, the underlined performers and contributors to the film. That
totally.
normally don't, that get, I don't want to say don't get recognition, but their recognition is overshadowed by best actor, but you know, a lot of those things. And this is just geared towards.
Yeah. There's the people like take the Emmys, right? There's the people that get on the televised version and the people that don't.
Right.
These are the people that don't.
These are the people that don't.
Yeah. So it's a cool film festival. They have great panels, networking opportunities, very, very creative, new approach to honoring the people that make movies.
So that's been moved, you know, to September. But what do you got going on now, buddy?
Now?
Yeah.
In my life?
Yeah. What's up?
I don't know, man. We're wrapping up this season, which is keeping us pretty busy.
Pretty amazing. You know, I was at Comic-Con this weekend.
Yeah.
And it was kind of cool. Like when I had an opportunity to meet Kevin Smith, and you know, the first thing I did was bring up the podcast.
Yeah.
And you know, he was all into it. And then I told him that, you know, we had done pretty decently with our sponsors and Patreon and whatever. And first question out of his mouth, he was like, you know, can you do me a favor and just tell an old soul your secrets? He goes, because I've never done any, you know, I've never made anything financially with my podcast. He's like, so it's pretty amazing that, you know, where you guys are at.
Yeah.
So, you know, and I had him sign a couple of cool things.
And then I said, he doesn't need to make money with his podcast.
And then exactly, he doesn't need to make money, and he doesn't need fucking sponsors.
Yeah.
So there's probably a reason he hasn't made money.
Right. Well, you know, the flip side is that it's like, you know, like people like Jason Bateman or whatever who have a podcast, right? Like they don't need to make money. So on that level, it's just a great podcast because they're doing it because they want to do it.
Yeah.
You know, and that's kind of like why we do it. We're not doing this to make money. We're doing this because it's fucking fun.
And then I think that was one of the other interesting things and why our conversation sparked, because I wasn't there to just praise him about, you know, I kind of was just like, hey, look, I was like, you know, a lot of the stuff that you talk about and you just tell people to go out and do it. I was like, you know, my friend and I decided to do it. We have a fucking podcast now. And I'm like,
yeah, a
lot of the shit that you say, and you're just like, look, just fucking do it and just do what you love and just be that.
Listen, this is like film school. I ain't gonna lie. There's a lot of self-interest in doing this podcast, right?
Yeah,
I mean, we're hopefully giving viewers and listeners something that they want, that they find valuable, but it's valuable to us too. And it's like, it's a ton of fun. This is like, we've created our own film school.
Right. And kind of, but it's so weird. We're like it's almost like we have our students, and behind the scenes, we're like, dude, I don't know anything about this. Let's just bring in a fucking expert.
Dude, story of my life, imposter syndrome. When they're eventually going to realize I'm full of shit.
Fake it till you make it.
Yeah, totally. Dude. But don't fake it till you make it. When you're flying a performer, and which is we're again back to our sponsors, and Brett Copes will be the first one we mentioned today, but he's gonna be on the show, so this is basically a huge plug for him.
Right? I mean, it's just a sponsored fucking episode.
But honestly, Fight or Flight Entertainment, Brett, big supporter of this podcast and believer in what we're doing and stuff, and we thank him for
he was having
our backs.
He was one of our very first and early on workshops that we had at Breakfall too.
I took a workshop. I took rigging 101 and 102 with him, like back in like 2015 or almost 10 years ago, whatever. Before I was even SAG. Before I was even SAG, yeah.
Right, 2015, was that before Breakfall? Or
it was around the time that we were thinking about it. Yeah.
Ah, cool.
It was great. It was a great thing, and then we brought him back here to do an intro to performer flying for stunt performers, and he's awesome, dude. He's awesome.
Every time I feel like I put on a harness, I feel like I'm fucking wrapped up fucking ham.
Like this guy?
No, I mean, I just
All right, stunt contact.
stunt contact. I love stunt contact. If it wasn't for stunt contact, I would be like, I would be calling you all the time, being like, dude, what'd you submit to lately? What's shooting?
Yeah,
What's going on?
yeah, totally.
And now because of stunt contact, I don't have to bother Steve.
You don't have to, but you still do. Asshole. Dude, okay, I don't have a toddler at home, so like I'm not awake at 7 fucking a.m. every time you're calling me and texting me. All right, dude? Like, I don't go to bed till like 2 o'clock.
Hey,
And you're fucking hitting me up on the phone like, no, I'm not awake with a baby, okay? I don't want to talk to you right now.
You want to know what? Likewise, you fucking douchebag. I'm not awake at 1 o'clock or 12 o'clock in the morning anymore, man. I'm in bed.
Come on.
Because I'm awake now at 5:30.
The kid's sleeping though, right?
Well, yeah, but we have sometimes she's not, like at 5:30, like we'll hear like blah 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 over the monitor, and she's just in her crib, like she started digging for her poop, and we have now started to have to put her onesies on backwards, as long as they don't have feet, because that's fucking weird. So the zipper's not in the front, because she unzip it and then she fucking digs.
Put them on backwards. How does her head fit in the feet part?
It's backwards, not upside down, dick. Woo!
Anyway, man, so thank you to Stunt Contact, Fight or Flight, for sponsoring us. Next, we'll be looking for Huggies. Oh, man. So listen, wherever you can follow us, please follow us, like us, share, all that kind of stuff. If you want to jump on our mailing list, the email, you can hit us up at fightingwithfriendspod@gmail.com. We'll add you to the mailing list. We're everywhere. We're on Letterboxd, YouTube,
and if any of our Patreon members are listening to this and you have not sent us an email with your address, please do. We have something to send you guys. Yeah. I know it's going to be a while.
Well, we did a giveaway.
But we did a giveaway.
And we emailed all you fuckers.
We did.
To give you free shit.
Free, cool shit.
And so if you haven't given us your mailing address, give us your mailing address so we can send you your free shit.
Exactly. And Steve needs those photos.
Right. Oh, my God. All right. On that note, I think it's time to bring in Brett. Uh-oh, we have a failure. We'll talk to him about safety and rigging.
You dropped Tom Cruise on his face, bro.
Yeah. All right, man. Let's do it. Let's bring in Brett.
All right, here we go.
Awesome. Brett, thank you so much for coming on the show, man.
Glad to be here.
Brett? Oh, sorry, I interrupted you.
Already?
We're off.
You're supposed to wait a little bit before you start.
Usually it takes me at least 45 seconds to do that.
It's the most exciting podcast I've been on this week.
We have to find out the others and then sabotage.
It's probably
sabotage.
Yeah, sabotage. So Brett, you're in New Orleans right now. You just finished driving there?
I am. I hustled my way down here to get here on time for this. It's just always better I find it's always better just to travel in the morning.
Yeah,
it is to try to do stuff later, but yeah, it's nice and warm down here. Doesn't feel like a hurricane at all.
Good. That's awesome. But you drove from Atlanta, right? How long?
Yeah, all the way from Atlanta.
How long is that drive?
7 hours.
7.
Quality 7 hours. There's nothing interesting along the way. There's no barbecue to be had anymore. The truck stop doesn't have a tiger anymore.
Wow.
The Mississippi Welcome Center is completely useless.
It's the unwelcome center now.
I don't know much about the geography of the country, but did you have to drive through Nebraska at all?
No Nebraska this time, but I used to drive quite a bit through Nebraska.
Shit, that is the most boring strait to drive through. It is just flat.
Look, but Nebraska's at some of the better tourist stops. You've got your 50-foot gopher in there. I think Tarhenge is in Nebraska. I mean, they break it up.
That's cool. That's cool, man. So what are you doing down there?
So I'm wrapping up a few gigs for the rest of the year. We've got a Halloween burlesque show that happens every year in one of the bigger theaters, and they've got some performers that I'm flying. So we've got a hair hang act, and we've got it's called a ribbon act. So instead of an aerial fabric, it's a bunch of ropes that are hanging down off a spreader bar. and the performer can make different shapes on that than you would. It's kind of a newer apparatus,
that's great.
and a couple other flying effects there.
You know, I used to be the executive chef at a burlesque supper club in the city called Choreo.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just-
did you make things with noodles that would hang from like other things?
No.
Yeah.
But I would have to it would be a whole dinner that go out during the entire production. But
Right.
Yeah.
they get pretty creative with the shit that they do. So
Yeah.
the fact
Yeah,
that they are now flying people is not a surprise.
Yeah, it's a good crossover between. Look, any startup performing group anywhere is going to ideally, at this point now with the internet, have nice crossover between themselves and any other performing troupe. So, when I started doing show business stuff and coming out of theater school, like we would have never found a burlesque troupe, right? The internet was barely what it is now.
Right.
So there was no burlesque troupe unless you stumbled into one, or there's no alternative dance troupe, and there were no circus schools. And now I try to let people know, like 20 years, if you want to learn how to do something circus, you want to learn how to do something stunts, you just Google it,
Mhm.
and you'll find 5 places that you can drive to where that just wasn't a thing for a long time. Like maybe
Yeah.
if you were lucky, you scrolled across an advertisement in the back of a magazine to go to Seattle to go to the USA Stunt School if you were lucky.
Right.
You ran across it on the right day. But
There was a
so
place.
it's a-
There was a place here in Brooklyn and Williamsburg when I was younger that we used to go to all the time in this old warehouse called the Bindlestiff Circus.
yeah,
They were-
Bindlestiff, yeah.
Yeah, they were awesome.
I worked with them.
Oh, did you really? I loved
they-
their show was awesome.
Yeah.
They were very cool. They were so cool. And that was when Williamsburg, before Williamsburg, Brooklyn is what it is now.
What
Yeah,
it is
awesome.
now.
Yeah. Which is like completely commercial burg. But
I like the name. Bindlesniff.
it was a great circus.
awesome.
It was great. So before we continue, we have to thank you, man, because you and Fight or Flight Entertainment is this is officially like our first sponsor spotlight episode. And we really have to thank you because
We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you.
yeah,
Honestly.
Especially
you and
me. Especially
yeah,
me.
yeah,
Especially you.
you more than all the other sponsors. But seriously, it's like we're so grateful, man. We're so grateful because we approached a lot of people in the beginning with this idea for this podcast, and you were one of the ones that just jumped right on board, and supported us. So
And are still
Tip of the hat.
supporting us. So
And are
thank
still
you.
supporting. I'm very
Yes.
supportive.
Makes us feel like we don't suck.
yes, it's just a write off for him, but Anyway, thank you so much, man.
Yeah.
So we since we're not specifically talking about fights, like a particular fight, although fights will come up.
Yeah.
But Paul had a really good question to kind of get us started.
I did have a question.
Okay.
So when people come into the gym or it just, even in general, when they're like, hey, I've done this before, I've done that before. And I just kind of, they say that they have some type of a background in whatever it is that you do. And they walk in and they're like, yeah, I know what's going on. I just kind of need this. I know that like Steve and I are like, okay, we'll ask them one simple thing. We'll be like, take a fighting stance and throw a 1-2. And from that, we will know every single thing that we need to know about that person and what we're about to deal with.
Yeah. Like, are we going to have an easy day or a hard day with this performer?
Is there something that you do, that kind of the same way, but with rigging and with flying someone?
Yeah.
And
like, so
someone's
you
kind of like,
you have
yeah,
a cast
blah, blah, blah.
that you have to work with. Is there some kind of baseline assessment that you do like right off the bat that gives you an idea of how good or difficult your day will be with a performer?
I think it's something that comes with, I think we all end up going through it no matter what industry we're in, and it goes through different stages with your experience. Like obviously, I'll tell you one of the things I dislike greatly is if somebody wants me to come rig something for them and they feel like they're going to give me a test to figure out what I know and who I am. And it usually comes across very aggressive. So to turn that around, I think as you get older and more accomplished, or you become confident, or you decide you just don't want to be a jerk to other people, you can definitely go through the stages of figuring out what's the softest, best way I can get the info I need from somebody who wants something specifically from me. Yeah, I used to say that, like, if somebody wants to come rig with me, I can ask them like 5 questions and kind of know what they're about. And I, at this point, am not so rigid as I might have been when I was younger, that they have to be A, B, and C, or they're complete useless. So I'll ask. I might not even remember all 5 of them, but I'll definitely ask like what harness they have. Do they own a harness, or have they always had a harness? And the one I get for people that are going to come rig is stunt guys will always be like, "Well, I have a climbing sutra stunt harness," and it's not really what I'm asking. What I'm asking is like, what is the harness you wear when you climb to go to work?
Like a safety harness. Yeah.
Yeah. And look, there's no wrong answer to it. They could even say like, "Well, I just climb with the rock climbing harness." And I can still work with that person. I know that they climb. I know that they wear a harness. Like, I know that they're not necessarily the same training or background I had, or they might not fit for this thing we're about to do. As long as they're not trying to impress me by the awesomeness of their harness, but like I get a sense of it. I'm totally, look, you want to climb in a rock climbing harness, at least you're wearing a harness. Okay. So I can do that. I can know that. I might ask them, I'll ask them who they've worked for. And what I kind of want to hear is what other riggers or what other rigging company, for me, what rigging company or company that has a rigging department have they worked for? Because again, in other industries, but in this industry, you can be your own head rigger and have never worked for anyone else. Right? So I'd like to know, if you say that you worked with, let's say you worked with ATS out of California. Well, I've never worked for ATS, but I know people that have. So I know that you've got a head rigger over you that has told you what to do and how to do things they want for that company, and et cetera. And you can follow those directions and work within somebody else's parameters. And ideally, in that situation, somebody's going to know more than you. You're going to learn something out of it. So I know what I'm getting with somebody like that. It's not to discount people that have been self-taught or a group of people that have been internally taught, but I'm going to deal with them differently. Talk to them differently. I might have different expectations out of them. On the circus side of things, there's definitely a bunch of people, especially when I was starting out, that taught themselves how to do a bunch of circus and acrobatic rigging and have never been employed by anybody. I don't mean they've never been hired by an aerialist. Anybody can get hired by an aerialist.
Right.
If you show up with a harness, you're an expert to the aerialist. I want to know what other riggers have hired you.
Right.
And how you fit into those teams. So I'm not as rigid as it used to be, but in whatever we do, we've got to go through those same probing questions. You guys have to do it when you're picking who you want to work with, or if you're coordinating something. I mean, and then I do it for people that hire me.
Well, that was my follow-up question is, what about the flip side when you are not the key rigger, but you're looking for a job?
I actually wanted to go back and kind of ask about same thing with the people you work with, but same question, but for actors.
So performers are a unique. I find performers to be a unique challenge in that I've worked on a ton of shows where we've had to fly performers that are afraid of heights, and that nowhere in the process of them getting hired or them accepting did that information come up. And look, I'll cut them some slack. They may not have been aware that they were afraid of heights. I've definitely been around performers that were really amazing rock climbers, but the first time we put them in a harness and hang them upside down, this is almost even more way out of their scope of what they're comfortable with. So along that lines, the way I was taught by the people that I learned from was that we try to prepare for everyone being a potato. Potato is the technical term. It's the key term.
There you go.
That
just don't become a mashed potato.
That's right. That if you can, can you set up the rig for a potato? This works really well for when we were doing a lot of stunt training in my gym in Atlanta. Some people are just potatoes, and so we have to come up with all of the mechanics that we can to kind of help them out in that scenario. And then there are some performers that they don't even need a wire on them. I don't even know why we're attaching anything to them. They pretty much float through the air all on their own. And we had a chance to work with some of those. But ideally, your hope would be, I guess, that if you're the person in charge, it'd be similar with fights. Like, can we craft a fight that a potato can do and still accomplishes what we want to accomplish? But it's obviously a blessing if they have more skill to it.
Sure.
I was actually just thinking as you were talking about that. I'm like, when we have those awkward students that are very uncoordinated from brain to body signals, right? I can't even imagine what you must see people that uncoordinated doing shit in the air.
Right.
Like that has got to be a total mind fuck for me. I remember the first time I flew when we were in LA and they were just spinning me flat like a log.
Yeah.
And it took me five tries before I understood like engaging my core, and that it's not really just a pull of the rip that makes you do it. You have to control your body.
Right.
So for an uncoordinated person in the air, how do you deal with that?
So I came into rigging as a performer and really just wanted to be kind of a choreographer. Like if you would have offered me like, which part of this do you want to do? Like I came out of fight choreography. I was a fight coordinator for a while. And what would have gladly just gone into the exploring the movement of it and how can we move people through, what shapes can they make and stuff like that.
Right.
Ultimately, though, it turns into just an equipment. You just buy a bunch of equipment, you become the equipment guy. And I've held back on a lot of ways that I could have gone because I didn't want to be an equipment guy. I'd rather be all inclusive. So if we're going to fly Peter Pan in a theater, you're the flying director. You're directing the scene, and then you also, by the way, you happen to put the stuff together. So I think it's one of the things that, I had a studio space in Atlanta for 2 years. We would train. I had a small team of people that I worked with, the rig turns, and we trained for about that 2 years. We train at least 3 times a week. We'd build different rigging setups and things like that. And then once a month or twice a month, we'd let the other stunt performers in town come into town and fly on the rigs that we made. And I think one of the advantages to that was we on our team would have good discussions about what the performer is doing, why that doesn't look right, or why it's uncomfortable, or where they can be better as the performer. And then when people come train, like they would have a chance to be in a harness. It's definitely a trained skill. It's a learned skill. It's something that you as the performer side of stuff just don't get a chance to train that often because somebody has to set it up for you in that kind of scenario. But then hopefully the people who are administrating you can do some coaching and directing, like just about where the physics are on the body, how the harness fits, why it hurts, why it doesn't look. The only catch-22 with that is the difference between stunts and, let's say, a live show is like, the live show you have to do a bunch of times. So you're picking things that work, that you can do repeatedly, where, look, you can ride a wire in stunts, a dozen times, and you're never more than a blur going across the screen. And you might have done that entire time and not learned exactly, maybe just not learned like what your body mechanics were doing. I'll cap it off. We sat with my favorite things were when we had the studio in Atlanta would be like, I have to go do this wire stunt. Can I come practice it? So that we'd get a chance to set up somebody else's rig that we didn't get hired to do. And then but the performer would get a chance to ride it in that scenario. My favorite, the one that comes to mind was, you're on all fours, you're getting kicked in the side, and you're going to do some twists through the air before you land against the wall.
Right, you're doing a rap or something.
That was the throw or the pull I was talking about when I did in LA. That took me like 5 tries to figure out how to engage my core and not.
That's the one. That's the one that I think is one of the most unnatural for the body to do. If you get a chance to practice it in a nice big soft space with people who don't mind pulling you a bunch of times, that's great. Because look, if you take that hit and you leave your head down a little bit, now your head's going to hit the wall. If you straighten your leg out when you get pulled and your arm out a little bit, you expand your body, you're going to fly a little bit differently. If we move the pick point up your body a little bit, it may be able to do it. And that kind of leads back to the previous question. It also gives your team an opportunity to well, this person's a bad flyer. Sorry, this person's a potato. So maybe we'll put 2 lines on them so it keeps them flat, or we hit the position we want to be in mechanically. But the goal of that practice was, like for you, you're going to spend time to figure out where it is. Because honestly, when you get a good performer, you can pick them up from almost anywhere on their body, and they'll hit what you want them to hit the way they hit it. Sometimes, I mean, it's a real blessing to have a performer that's got body awareness in that way and has had a chance to practice it. Even if you just had a low ceiling somewhere and you just stuck somebody in a harness and let them do backflips, they're going to learn a lot about backflips in control. Front flips are hard. Like just the ability to do, that kind of movement. They're just going to learn more about where their body goes.
So this actually, I was on set once. I'm not gonna bring up what set or any names, and they were pulling somebody, and every single time the pull happened, it was kind of different.
Yeah.
And then they finally just decided to shoot it, and they were just like, okay, we're gonna go. And one of the rigging people mentioned to me, they're like, this is why if you're gonna do something even as simple as a pull, you have to get someone who knows how to be pulled, because if they don't, it's going to happen differently every single time. So sometimes they would catch air, sometimes they would be dragged, sometimes they would go 3 feet, sometimes they would go 2 feet.
Right.
And then basically I heard the rigger just being like, it doesn't matter how we do it. It's them. Just shoot it.
But on set, Paul, just to follow up a question for you, was that viewed as performer issue or rigging design issue, like that they couldn't replicate?
So the rhetoric on set was basically it was the rigging guy's fault and he should have found a way to get her in the air, period. And that he shouldn't have shot something that she was doing differently every time, because you just kind of shouldn't do that. She should be comfortable with what's going to happen and not kind of not expect the way that the end result is going to be.
So I guess the real question to Brett would be like about research and development and being able to replicate a gag.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It would not be uncommon in any aspect, whether it be movie and TV or live shows or circus or anything else, that not everybody that's involved is as aware of what it is they're doing and how they're able to communicate with other people. How many of us, including me, are getting away with things long enough that we think that gives us a certain amount of skill level to continue to do it, when they haven't really learned to be a student of what it is they're doing. And so, yeah, I mean, if that question was posed to me, is it the performer? It's one of us or both of us,
mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you could have maybe a different puller, a better puller. Like pulling is a skill. If you've done a bunch of stunts, you've probably just seen big guys pull a rope really hard in one direction as hard as they can. But if you're going to do anything more complicated than that, knowing that you can give extra pull at the beginning, but then slow down on the second half, or maybe you creep up in the beginning. Maybe if you creep up in the beginning to pick them up off the ground a little bit, and then you pull them hard. Like there are things in pulling, the more you do it, you can start to see it. And then the hardest part about that is you've got two people doing two different things. Unless you put them on a machine, unless you put that performer on a ratchet or a winch, like something's going to be different each time. The only way to guarantee one of you's not doing something different is for one of them to be a machine. We did a live show in Germany where we had a performer who was on a winch that had bungee attached to it. And so the bungee would stretch, the winch would stretch the bungee, and the performer would shoot up in the air, and they were dancing around the stage and choreographing. The hardest part about that is you can't land that performer, because when they land, the bungee is stretching and the winch has to catch up to them. In the meantime, somebody has to hold them. So every time she flew, the other dancers on the stage had to go over and catch that performer and hold her in place so that they could move on to the next thing. This was, look, your expression is correct.
What
so we worked on this. We worked on this
fuck?
for 3 months. We did it 100% without stopping, maybe 2 days before the show opened, because it's the winch has to do a thing. The bungee reacts differently, slightly differently each time. Like we were doing all of our side on the machine part of it, because all what we didn't need is we didn't need the dancers to hold on to her for 1 second too long, because that was going to change everything. And it was a programmable winch. So the machine was going to do what it's going to do the same every time, which doesn't give you any chance to adapt it. So coming back to it, we were just trying to get the machine to be exactly the same every time so that the performers can count on the fact that the machine's going to be the same every time. Right?
So this actually makes me think about the Broadway Spider-Man and all of those injuries I just remember hearing about from when they were flying and landing, and they went through like an insane number of Spider-Mans, like almost 20. So what would you say was the reasoning that there were just so many fucking fails on that? And it's kind of almost undeniable. Like, I don't know who was doing it, but there were a lot of people getting hurt.
I mean, Brett wasn't on the show, so
no. I'm just saying, like, like when it's just.
I'll say this. I'll give a very diplomatic answer. Obviously, I didn't work on that show.
No.
But I've definitely worked with people who have worked on the show, and I don't know. I don't know who put together their system or protocols of rehearsal and communication, stuff like that. I don't know. So let's assume.
I'm so sorry if I put you on the spot, but
no. Just... Let's assume that all of that, like whoever was in charge and the choreographer and the automation team, like all of them were top notch, and they were all in sync, and they were doing all the stuff correctly, and they had enough rehearsal time and all that stuff. When I've worked on a show that had unexpected injuries like that again and again, doing things like that, it was because they hadn't done shows like that before. And I've definitely worked at companies. I've worked at big snazzy companies that do, big shows like that every day, year after year after year. And I think the public would be surprised how many performers get injured on a regular basis. Accident injuries were two different things, not accident injuries.
Right.
But look, that's a very physically demanding. If you were in a live stunt show at Six Flags, for the entire summer, like how many of you survive that without anything? Ideally, the show is created in a way that it's sustainable for the performers in it. But how do you find out the show's sustainable for the performers in it? Well, you keep doing it. You injure 5-year Batmans, and then Brett gets to be #1 Batman for a year. So then you change the show a bit. So I think that one had a lot of press on it. I'm not going to say that it didn't have issues, but honestly, I don't know. But I think the public would be just unaware of the general amount of injuries that would happen in production.
In general, we talk about that. Not exactly a detour in the conversation, but we talk about that with injuries on film sets all the time. Like where the big giant injury, the big ones, like the car crash, the armored car truck that just happened in Atlanta, and the big accidents get some press, and then everybody forgets about it. But there's so many injuries that happen all the time. We talked about it with David Tutman, how the highest mortality rate in crew members is with camera operators. It's not like stunt people, but there's no knowledge of that. There's no movement, that has built up around safety.
Right. It's not on camera. I would always say that if we're going to set up a system where you two are going to pull a rope and you're going to fly me, all the focus goes on me, and you guys are probably in more danger than I am. You're jumping off a ladder. There's somebody's going to put something underneath you. Somebody's going to block your way with a doorway. Like all the focus goes on to what's happening on stage. But look, backstage in any production of any size can be extremely dangerous, especially the more the focus is on what's happening on stage.
So that kind of brings us to you, whether it's film or live, but you can maybe speak to the differences. But when you're starting a production, when you get a script or when you get the new job, how do you approach the breakdown of the script, the scene, what needs to happen, how you're going to build your team? Take us from the beginning of a job. What's your process?
I feel that I work in a way that I had not been worked with, either as a performer or as a team member. So when I'm in charge of things now, I feel like I come to them a little bit differently than how they've been presented to me. And that has probably lost me jobs several times. Like the first thing I'll do is probably ask the director. Like I want to know what they want. Like I'll ask the director, like, how many things you want to do? How many people do you want to have? How big do you want this to be? Or even if I'm like a key rigger to a coordinator, I'll ask them, how do you want this done? Because I can think of 5 different ways to do it, but you've only got 1 or 2 in your head. I'd rather do it your way unless I need to convince you to do it another way. But I mean, obviously you go through the script, you pick out as many things as you can, but I'll gladly ask the director, like, have you gone through and figured out how many flying effects you want in this? And try to leave some padding open for things that'll come up. I believe that every rigging team is a 5-person team. I just always do. It's the best number. It's the greatest number of people to have, especially if I don't have to be the one that climbs anything.
Why
I
5?
really like pointing and saying smart stuff. But 5 people is it, but it's never going to be 5 people. It's
You like to
probably
be
gonna
the you like to be the
people
chef.
Right. And look, depending on what kind of production it is, for a live show for theater, they can't afford me to stay there for 2 months. So I'm
Right.
going to train their team. I'm going to train their people. And so I have to allow in for some amount of that. And if you look, nobody's that good of a teacher. Some of those people are going to be knuckleheads and they're not going to be good at it. So now I have to create whatever it is we're going to do. If they give me 5 people, I've got to create not only the flying effects that are going to be on stage, but how everything that we're going to do has to accommodate that. This is the 5 people. I don't get to pick other people. You know, I can obviously, if somebody's egregious, we can solve that. But if there's always going to be 2 people that are really afraid about what's happening, or they're uneasy or not able to express it in some way. But I think you'd also find that if somebody's going to hand me 5 people, somebody wants to do it really well, and they'll get really excited about getting involved in it.
So
I mean, my nephew. I'm just curious of your experience. My nephew works at Tate Towers. He does a lot of automated rigging stuff.
Sure, yeah.
And so he's always he does exactly what you're talking about. They set up the designs, blah blah blah. They go train whoever is involved.
You've
with
got
that
to train the
production.
tour team because they're not going on tour.
Right. But he has stories about being called back because somebody doesn't know how to do something or something. You know, like how many times he's called back for the simplest things. So yeah,
I think it's something that changes. If you work for a big company and the big company is aware of it, like they'll create a protocol for how to handle it. But I definitely think it's something that I see a lot more either with young performers or stunt people that I work with now, or back when I was younger. They get more excited about their opportunity to do stuff in the show, that what they would hopefully learn a little bit later on is that they need to scale that back, and you need to tailor to the show to what's possible and what continues to be safe. The same thing, fight choreography, man. I'll even today, to bring it back to fights, like I worked on a production not so long ago where I was going to come in and fly the performers in this fight that they were going to do, but I was the coordinator for it. So my fight guy wasn't available, so he recommended a fight guy that I worked with for the first time. And I said, look, I'm going to show up on Thursday. You're going to show up on Monday. I want the whole fight to be choreographed and everybody able to do it, so that we can just attach the lines to it and let them backflip a few times, because that's what they want. That's what I want. So you choreograph it. And look, I'm not a martial artist, but when I showed up, these guys were doing 100 moves in the span of 3 minutes. It's what it seemed like to me. Way too many moves. If it was a Brett fight, it would have had 7 moves in it.
yeah.
Right? It would have had maybe 4, and a lot of breathing, right? Because that's the fighting I learned when I was younger. But yeah, it was a ton of, and it was really small stuff that couldn't be seen. And I'm like, I need the guy to go over here. I need something to happen. I need to come over here, and then needed something to happen. So we ended up having to. I mean, you know what had to happen? We just had to take a lot of it out. You spent a lot of time teaching them a bunch of stuff and they couldn't do. It didn't look good on them. But this guy was a younger guy. He was really excited. What a great opportunity. I've got 2 full days. The performers were young. They were excited. Young, maybe not the right term. The performers were excited. They're like, yeah, I can remember 100 moves. And then mean old Brett comes in and goes like, you can't do all that. It's like, it's got to be like 12 moves.
I feel like I hear the story from every department. Like we interviewed Andy Young, who's an editor, and he was saying like, you know, like directors hate me because like they'll do all these amazing things, and he's like, yeah, we're just not gonna use that, you know. It's like, and then we talk about it with fights, you know. It's like you have to scale it back to tell a story, not to just have cool for the sake of cool, you know.
When I was I have it happened to me exactly. I was working for Tony Vincent, and he brought me in one day to just come in as an advisory for a gun take, and it was a whole bunch of Krav Maga stuff and a good fight. And I really think he brought me in that day to just be as awesome as he is and just teach me a lesson. Because he knew I had fucking gun. He knew the second it was like, I want you to come in and advise on a gun take. He knew my fucking brain would have been like, I have so many things that they've never seen on camera before. So it was like, go in the next day and show 3 gun takes. So I went in and I showed 3. And then he was like, look, we're just going to go with
the basic one.
The basic one, you know, just double hand, boom, snap real quick. And I was like, I felt like he knew that from the very beginning. But then he spent the entire day telling me how it's all about the story and it's not about the choreo that you have. Sure. That's great. So, you know, he was just telling me about how, you know, one time that he was brought in to he got a chance to choreograph something for a show that was in its 3rd season. He showed the stunt coordinator, and then he was like, this is great. He's like, but where did this guy learn this? He's 60, you know, he's already past his prime. Right. He's never done this for 2 seasons. Where are we going to show that he learned this? And it was just such an amazing thing to where when I go back and I look at the scene, all of the gun takes that I showed Tony, not fucking one of them would have worked for that scene. Right. And that quick, simple take was perfect.
Mm-hmm. I don't know what you, okay. I don't know what you, but I think it's hard to get that information. I think from the beginning, from when I was first just a fight choreographer in college, you know, you had a couple different directors. Like the best director that we would have in those situations, they'd have an idea. We wanted to go here, we wanted to go here, we wanted to go here. You fill it in. Like, great, that's awesome. But for the most part, and I think it happens to some degree in all aspects of both of our industries, that somebody just throw their hands up in the air and be like, well, it's going to happen. And they just kind of tap out of it, which is how you end up in that scenario. Why are we doing a ninja fight in the middle of a Western? Because somebody threw their hands up in the air and we hired a ninja to choreograph it. Mm-hmm. And the one thing I teach now when I teach, I'm like, let's just talk about all the conversations you need to have and how to get through them. Like, how do you break into that? How do you want it to go? Do you want it to be 7 moves? Do you want it to be 12 moves? Like I most of the time, if somebody hires me for a film project and they want me to rig something, it's usually something bigger than the average person can do. And I usually try to convince them not to do it. Like, yeah. Can we do this in a completely other way? But man, it's such a competitive showbiz, such a competitive industry, and it's such a insecure industry. And I think it takes a certain time to get past that. This is my opportunity. That first hump of this is my opportunity, where you may just be shooting yourself in the foot by trying too hard. Honestly, trying too hard. Right. But and yeah. So you get your 10,000 hours in, or you get 150 shows or 2,000 sword fights in, and you're like, what really works is this.
Have you ever had to kind of combine 2 things? So have you ever had to pull somebody on fire and then also bring in a fire guy, and then you got to worry about the ropes and the heat integrity and all that stuff, and doing it more than once? How, if you have done something like that, how do you even go about the safety that would go into place to pulling somebody multiple times when everything's on fire? Like, what's the reset like? And just
good question. I've never pulled anyone on fire.
Okay.
We'd use cable because it's not flammable. But I did work for 2 years on a show that had tons of rigging and flying performers that happened in a pool. So now what happens to all your equipment when it gets wet? And I learned a lot on that show. I can't take any credit for it. The show was already 12 years old by the time I got there, but it was definitely very interesting to learn. I mean, one of the reasons I believe you see so many stunt riggers using sailing pulleys and sailing equipment is because of this show. Because all of our gear had to be able to withstand moisture. A lot of it was in the pool. Even to move things in the pool, there's no winches in the pool. So the winch line would have to drop from above, go through a pulley under the water, and then move your piece or your person through the water from below.
So you worry about like chemical breakdown of like nylon and stuff from the chlorine.
Yeah. What is polyester? What happens when polyester gets wet? What happens when nylon gets wet? Like, one of those two loses a ton of strength when it gets wet. What happens to your half the climbing suture harnesses that you have, the reason some of them are Spectra is because Spectra is much more waterproof. Luckily, on that show, they were well funded and had a lot of very smart people who were really interested in being really good at it. So they all kind of became scientists of what it does, which is an amazing opportunity that not a lot of us get to, like, really go deep into the science of what it is that we're doing, especially if you're setting something up different each time. You're just not getting a chance to, like, really get repetitions in on this. One of the things that stands out is that if we used any nylon or polyester rope in the show, we would sink it in the pool for 2 months, in the back corner of the pool that didn't get used, because we knew that it would shrink the rope, it would change the color of the rope, and any chemical interaction that there was would be done by that time. So anytime we'd switch out a rope, we'd have to go diving in the pool to go get one of the ropes that's been soaking for a while and put it somewhere else in the show.
Interesting.
And tons about welding inspections and rust inspections and what is aluminum degrades over time. People think it's invulnerable, but it's not. What happens? We were definitely using steel carabiners in the bottom of the pool because we needed the strength that they had, because stainless steel carabiners aren't as strong and aluminum ones are not as strong as well. So then how do we reduce the risk of this device rusting every month? Well, we get a new one every month. So no credit for that. Like I said, all of that was worked out by the time I got there. The next show I worked on, we had different challenges, but it was good to be a part of it. It was good to be a part of a team that was that scientifically and methodically invested, because that has stuck with me since then.
Sure.
And every time I've gone on from that, I've got this structure of really, really wanting to be deeply involved in the science of it. The next show we did, we had a lot of bungee in the show. Bungee is there's a lot of variables with bungee, and we ended up writing a Bible, like a 40-page book on what happens to bungee when you do this to it and that to it and stuff like that. So,
and you mentioned, like, it's good to have these opportunities, which you offer people a lot of opportunities when you travel around teaching. But how did, and we've mentioned it before in intros when we talk about that you teach a lot around the country. You do a lot of intro, primer type workshops, and for seasoned people, beginner. How did that start? Because so many people have gotten their first opportunity to learn about this stuff, at least in our industry, from you. Like, where did that come from? Like, what was your pathway to doing that? To offering trainings and classes and stuff like that. Because when you mentioned having the gym in for 2 years in Atlanta, your studio, like, I could relate because I have a studio and I used to travel a lot teaching seminars. I used to travel at least monthly, multiple times, 2 or 3 times a month sometimes. And eventually
internationally.
Yeah. And eventually I stopped because I felt like it was suffering here. Like, I was just away too much.
Mm-hmm.
And so I dialed it back, and I don't do that as often now.
Having to leave guys like me to run the gym.
Look, there was a time that I felt I was teaching too much and not working enough.
Yeah.
So I was like, I stopped teaching for a couple of years because I'm like, I'm doing this more than I'm doing jobs, and jobs it's what I'm supposed to be doing or what I want to be doing, and it's where my credit, and that's where I learn, and that's where I get to steal equipment.
So I guess the question is, how did that start, that you started having sort of your teaching tours, if for lack of a better word, and then that balance between, like, that balance we're talking about?
I'd like to say it was all because I'm benevolent and awesome, but to be honest with you, I've always taught something since I was 15. I taught swimming, I taught other things. So I've got teaching is a skill that I have. I know how to take information and put it into a digestible format for other people. And I wish I could say, like, I just thought I was being helpful. But to be honest with you, it was a big status bump. It's a big ego boost, big status bump. And I did the same thing that everybody else does when they learn something they're really excited about. They get to a point where they feel like they know a lot and nobody knows what they know. So how can I use this position of authority of me knowing and you not knowing? Like, I don't want to take away the fact that I like to teach and I don't mind helping people. But look, in the beginning, I I wanted to be a big boss and I wanted to get my name out there, and that was a
Sure.
big way to do it. That being said, I definitely feel like I've grown past that aspect of it. But it would be wrong or less funny of me to say that of course that existed. It's got to happen in martial arts. Like,
Of
we all
course.
know people that have, you know, I think it's, you can correct me. I think it's twofold. You do get excited. You're like, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to do it my way or something like that. But also, like, you're really passionate about this thing and you've spent a lot of time to learn how to do it. And one of the ways you get to do it more is if you start to teach other people. Like,
Mhm.
you're kind of creating opportunities, and heavens forbid you come up with something new or interesting or different or something you want to tweak that maybe you don't get to do in a previous organization. That's why people end up starting schools. That's why people start their own clubs. That's how you get theater companies, and that's how you get circus companies and everything like that. So it's not completely
It's how you get podcasts.
it's how you get podcasts.
I mean, honestly, this is like film school for us. We do this because
Right.
it's fun and we learn a shit ton of stuff,
Mhm.
but we also get to teach at the same time. It's
Right.
like mutually beneficial, you know?
I became, so right about the time I became what I felt my first hump. I feel people go through two humps. It's the Dunning-Kruger effect. You learn a certain amount to think you're an expert, and you're not. And then you learn enough that you realize, I should stop telling people what I know. And then at some point you go up this other bigger curve later on where you really are an expert. You don't talk to anybody anymore. So when I hit my first hump of the Dunning-Kruger effect, the internet was starting to become much more of a thing. The aerial arts industry in the United States became much more expansive all of a sudden, and there weren't a lot of people that were rigging for them. And we were still doing things in that industry that were very old, like the general, what is now might be considered common knowledge wasn't common then. And I kept getting asked questions, and it made me feel good to answer those questions. And at some point, I just kept more or less getting asked the same 8 or 10 questions. And I'm like, well, that's a seminar.
Mhm.
We can just go in and just answer those 8 or 10 questions again and again. And ideally, that's something that, will be helpful to people. And those questions have changed a bit. I've seen, some of those 8 or 10 questions that were just, again, brand new information for people have now kind of become common knowledge. You can find that information a lot more. And maybe there's another set of 8 or 10 questions. So when I teach now, or when I'll gladly train with other people, I'm still a student of what I do as a performer rigger, performer flyer, stunt rigger. Like, I still want to know more. I want to know more than everybody else that shows up. And I'm still fairly passionate about it, not as much as I used to be, but like, I still want to know stuff. I'm glad to work with other people and learn more stuff. And most days I don't mind answering questions and helping people out, but it definitely takes a lot of, as fellow teachers, like, it's a lot of energy going in one direction. It's not always reciprocated. So I had to learn along the way, like, maybe we're not helping people today. It just doesn't feel good, kind of a thing. But that's nice to hear. Look, I don't ever hear about people that have taken my workshop or seminars and gone on to other things. Some of the guys that we trained with for 2 years in Atlanta, are 3 or 4 of them are doing really nice stuff on their own. And they may never say that they learned anything from me, which is fine. That's not why we were doing it, but
they know how to fly a potato.
they're definitely using the term potato, and they count down 3, 2, 1, go, like I do. So you can kind of see where it comes from. And look, and the last part of that was, like, I learned from people. Like, specific people came. I went and either took seminars or workshops, and I learned with people, and wouldn't have learned anything if people didn't take their time with me. So I'll keep taking time with other people as much as I can.
We don't have a potato, but we have a Sakuraba monkey.
We have a Sakuraba monkey.
Yeah.
We have our Mission Impossible Sakuraba. We rigged it up just for your episode.
Look at the size of the melon on that thing.
Well, you know what? I wanted to get him. I made the little harness for him, and we wanted him to be like this, but he's so top heavy that we're like, Mission Impossible, baby.
And that's hanging from your, like, 2-ton beam clamp in the studio.
Yes.
We actually have we cut some more. We put some more since you were here last time, but yeah, it's fun.
I actually, that makes me think of kind of my next question is, what do you think is most dangerous? I feel like there's kind of like 3 things that you're either pulling someone off the ground, keeping them in the air, or landing them on the ground. Which do you think is kind of the most dangerous
Of those three?
of those three? Keeping
Landing
someone
them.
Suspended or landing. Okay, that's what I was thinking. Why
So
is that?
you're probably looking at it more from a stuntman view. So everything's got to. Most of what you're doing is wanting to look violent, right? If you're going to land somebody on the ground, it's going to be a violent landing. Even if it's a superhero landing, they're coming in with some amount of energy, and that's where you're really finessing. You know, you want them to come in at a certain speed. You want it to look a certain way. They've got to. You want to give their body weight back to them. You know, so that they can create that pose. But you're definitely running them into something that's not going to move. Right.
Well, nothing hits harder than the ground.
Probably the second part of that is that I've definitely people can get really excited about moving performers really quickly and maybe not paying attention to what happens after they leave the stage or the frame that they're in, like what happens over there. Because the next thing is they're going to hit something over there. One of the things we deal with a lot in fall protection, stopping people from falling on things, is there's lots of places to clip into. But it's very hard for people to think about, once I clip into it and I fall and I start swinging, what do I run into? Because you swing faster than you fall.
Explain.
So you're going to hit the wall. Physics, depending on where you are, you have to pick up speed over 12 feet to fall at a fast enough rate. You're speeding up the whole time, but a swing fall propels you faster. You'll swing into a wall faster than you will fall 12 feet.
I'm testing the theory.
I just got teabagged by a monkey.
It's like everything else. The obvious thing is this. Everybody's worried about the height. Everybody's worried about the fall, right? That's all they're looking at. But there are probably 10 other things that are also happening that are dangerous. That's a good question. Putting people down. Up is easy. Everybody understands how up goes.
Right.
Holding them up there is easy. Putting them down, you want to put them down on purpose in a way that works out.
Sure.
I feel like, to find that common ground of aggressive but soft, it's got to be pretty tough, to make it look like they do that superhero landing when the dust fucking comes out from underneath them. They got to look like they hit the ground right in order to make that happen. So it's got to, that. But
that's all. I mean,
is that like?
I'm not a rigger, but that's controlled. Like, that's a controlled descent.
I was going
right?
to say, do they control descent that on some type of a system or?
This would be one where I would ask, like, how bad do you want to see this? Right. And now we know. Look,
Scarlett Johansson Avengers.
Right. But we can get that. We can get that by dropping the performer most of the way and stopping them above the ground. And then they could jump up in the air and hit the ground. And you can now, with the technology we have, you can match those two together.
Right.
It is. Look, some people are really good at it.
Video games.
Yeah. Some people are really good at it and some people aren't. But if you're trying to match, I think you'll see if you watch a bunch of behind the scenes stuff, dropping people is fine, but I think you'll only rarely see that they come all the way to the ground. It's way easier for me to stop somebody 5 feet off the ground or 10 feet off the ground than it is to really work on matching that, that decelerator to match up with them landing on the ground. That takes a lot of practice, and I'd steer away from it. I'd find 3 other ways to do it. I definitely got to ask, can I drop somebody off a bridge in 4 feet of water and they have to hit the water? And the coordinator and I went through just a lot of different ways to do it in the scenarios that are doing it. And I'm like, look, the best way to do this is to make it multiple shots. Like, are you, and not every stunt guy thinks that way. Not every flying director thinks that way. They get excited and they're like, what a great stunt for us to do. How exciting we get to do this big stunt where we drop somebody into 4 feet of water and it looks awesome. Unless you're marketing the movie on that, I think you're just doing something really dangerous for
like an Assassin's Creed, where they really did a huge marketing on the movie when that guy jumped like 150 feet.
Yeah.
That that fall was a huge part of the marketing for that.
Yeah, you're doing something specific. You're doing something specific for a specific reason like that. Whether the movie was any good or not, everybody remembers that, right?
Yeah.
You're not going to stop Tom Cruise from jumping his thing. Like, that's part of the marketing now. But look, high falls have just about gone away since the wires came in. So who's doing high falls and why? Because they're obviously quite a bit more risky than just lowering somebody. And I'm not even, the way digital technology looks now, I don't know why we would drop somebody at full speed. Like, why do we ever have to free fall anyone? If we want, first of all, the human being watching it can't tell. They don't know what a full speed human being looks like. And why not just have them on a device the entire way down? Would be something I would say.
So have you, I guess, there's always aspects, even when you're a stunt coordinator and the director says you can do something, asks you if you can do something, and you're like, no, I can't do that. I guess kind of in a two-part question, have you ever been the guy who's like, we can't do that? And then have you ever been the guy to where somebody said we can't do this, and you're like, oh no, I can do that?
I guess the third option is we shouldn't do that.
We should, or just been like, listen to that guy, don't fucking do it. Yeah.
Okay, what's the first version is?
The first version is you can't do it. And then the second version is like someone else can't do it, and you're like, I can totally do that. And then the third version is you're like, nobody should do this.
Okay, so the first version is Brett, you can't do it, or it can't be done. Is that kind of the question?
Yeah, like, has there ever been someone who was just like, hey, can you do this? And you're like, I can't do that.
I can't do that.
Like, you hear that story of Tom Cruise when he wanted to do the jump on the run in the building, and, and he goes across, and he went to one guy, a safety rigging guy, and the first guy was like, I can't do that, and he was like, okay, you're fired, and he found a guy who could. I don't know if that's real, but to me, it kind of, I made the same face you did. I was just like, that's defeats the whole purpose of.
There's, if it can be done, like if it can be physically done,
right? Then
it's about how risky it is. And how acceptable that amount of risk is. So the Tom Cruise thing is like, well, Tom Cruise wants to do dangerous things, more or less, right? And so he's able to, whatever position he's in, he can say like, yeah, it's a 1 out of 10, it's a 9, but that's okay, right? He can say that.
But that reminds me of what you said earlier also, like comparing like a live show where somebody's got to do it, they've got to be comfortable, they've got to do it multiple times a day, multiple times a week, whereas on a TV or a film, we're doing it today. We can accept a little more risk. You can be a little more uncomfortable. We're just gonna go.
There is, one of the ways you do reduce the risk is by reducing the amount of times that it's performed, right? You take, if you're, I usually say like anybody who climbs, so not even setting up a rig, if you're going to be somebody who's wearing a harness who's climbing, you should assume that every time you climb, you're going to fall. And eventually sometime you will. Does that happen the first 100 times you do it? Does it happen the first 1,000 times you do it? Does it happen 10,000 times you're going to do it? If you do it 10,000 times, like somewhere in there, you're going to fall. So you're having equipment and trying to create a scenario where you make that number longer and longer, but you should assume it's going to happen.
That's right? The exact advice my friend gave me when I was talking about when I was thinking about getting into motorcycles. And he goes, listen,
at some point you're going to crash.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what made me never get on a fucking motorcycle.
Right. So what can we do to make that, either make the, take the crash and make it less impactful, or how can we extend the amount of time it takes for that to happen? So your first question comes down to what's an allowable amount of risk. And I'm at a unique point in my life where like, it's not for me. I'm not going to drop anyone 300 feet. Just not going to do it. I'm not going to go up 300 feet. I don't want to. Like, there are things that I've been 300 feet. I've rappelled off of 300 feet off a wind turbine, and I'm like, I'm good. Not again.
No, thank you.
Like, I'm 50. Like, I'm not 25-year-old Brett would have been like, how many times can we do it?
Right.
So that's the answer to the first.
I would have cried
this?
at the top.
Look, at some point, to me, at some point, you're so high up, it's so unworldly. Your brain kind of is not conceiving about exactly how high you are.
I have that.
It's really when you get.
I have that I want to jump feeling.
Well, that's what that's funny what you say, because when I got the job on Devs and I was talking to Kathy Jarvis, the stunt coordinator, she was like, "How are you with heights?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm totally fine. Been on wire a few times, jumped out of planes." She's like, "Jumping out of planes doesn't count because it's like a different mentality. But this scene is you climbing over a fire escape and scaling across a ledge like 6 stories up. Like that's different in your brain than 10,000 feet up, you know?
Yeah, I don't need to prove that stuff anymore. I'm past that.
Yeah.
What was the second scenario of that? So the second scenario was of your question.
No, the first one was that can't be done. The second one is
the second one is I can do that. So someone else said no, but you are,
Sure.
but you can.
Right. One of the lucky parts about me being me is that I feel like I've had a wide variety of workplace experiences, and I've learned from a wide variety of people, and that I've done circus and stunts, and I did stunts 20 years ago versus now, which are fairly different in a lot of ways, and technology, what we're trying to accomplish, is different. So I feel like I've got a big breadth of different experiences. So I'm rarely locked into this is how we do it. We can only do 5 things, kind of a thing. And I feel fairly confident that I can at least understand just about anything anybody's going to try to do, if not figure out something similar to it.
Cool.
But I'm also past the point where I'm like, you don't need me. Like there might be somebody who's, this guy's way better at this than I am, or this piece of technology is going to help you out a lot more and make it not as dangerous. And so I don't do a lot of movie and TV stuff compared to a lot of people, but when I do get called, it's usually because we're figuring out something like that. Like, hey, this is a little more complex, or somebody will come to me and they'll be like, I've got an idea. Like they just want to bounce an idea off of someone. And it's one of my favorite things to be like, this piece of equipment, and I just kind of open it up, this would work perfect for that, and just happen to like say this thing or something like that. So that's some of it's been nice to work to a point where people that my mentors and the people that I've learned stuff from, they've come to me and I'm able to give them a piece of advice or something back to it.
Cool.
And then the third scenario was don't do it.
You shouldn't do this.
Like nobody should do this. If you find a guy that does this, he's a fucking asshole.
But we already know, and I don't entirely disagree. You said like you spend a lot of time convincing people they don't have to do something.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be dangerous. I don't know why anybody's in danger anymore. Not on, especially movie and TV stuff. Like, okay, so this is you can tell from my IMDb, my 30 credits long of like, Brett doesn't know what he's talking about. But look, I've worked in every other industry, and I don't know why certain people are agreeing to do things that at a level of danger that they don't need to. And I don't know why productions are letting them, and I don't know why they're not. I don't know. I wish people would want to be more of a student of things, but I think it's exciting. Look, I want to be a stunt guy, and I want to tell people I'm a stunt man, and so I want to do a stunt. Like, we're going to do a stunt, right? I mean, that's what you're there for. And we've all been trained. We're only one generation away from people that or 2 generations away from when they would have thrown kerosene on somebody and tried to put them out fast enough.
Sure.
Like, the danger level was the technology just didn't exist. Even the most accomplished stunt riggers you will run into, maximum of maybe 20 years of experience, maximum, right? Because before the Matrix, it didn't exist in the way we think about it now.
Well, even when we were talking about Doc Duhame, and he was talking about being on top of the train, like runaway train and stuff like that. He's like, there was no such thing as stunt rigging back then. We were just like, let's see what works. Yeah, don't fall off. Yeah. We're gonna put this cable on you and hope for the best.
Right. You know? And there's ways to reduce the risk in that and make it better. But like I think wouldn't it be great if we were just like not hurting, if nobody got hurt? I don't know why there would be a live gun on set. There's no reason for it in my mind, and we're only now kind of coming around to that idea. Some of it's generational, some of it's equipment, some of it's mostly information. I try to find a way to put people in the least amount of danger as possible. And just to cap off your question, usually I may not, my job will come into 2 plays. Like, look, we're going to do it anyway, Brett. Are you involved in it? Kind of a statement. I'm like, well, then my job is to try and do everything I can within my power and my abilities to try to take what it is we're doing and make that risk a little bit smaller as best I can in the parameters that I'm in, right? We're going to do it anyway. So how can I help make the situation better, whether they realize it or not? But probably the thing that's come up the most in the last few years is people will come to me and they'll be like, hey, Brett, this is the rig that I want to do. And this is how we're going to set it up. And what do you think about it? And somewhere in the conversation, I'm like, you shouldn't do it. Like something in the conversation about the way you're talking to me or the questions that you're asking me or the two things you just said or the jankiness of the drawing you just sent me. I'm like, I know you feel like you've got this, but everything in my heart's just saying like, I don't think you will. You might get away with it. You might do it and no one will get hurt and you'll think you've accomplished something. But I don't think you're the person that should be doing this.
Like you basically just got lucky.
Well,
you shouldn't play on that.
And there's a fallacy of safety, right? Like you said, you can climb 10,000 rock faces and never fall, and that could just be lucky, and you could be doing something wrong every time.
We don't count near misses well enough.
Yeah,
we don't. Like near misses are like you didn't eliminate the danger, you just happened. Firearms is a great example. Like if I shoot 6 bullets at you and I don't hit you, well, then it was safe because there was no consequences to it. But that's not true. The risk was always there. You just happened to miss it on this one.
Yeah.
And one of the things that definitely one of the things that doesn't work in live shows. And if you're going to do it 10 times in a play or we're going to do an event, like you're going to find out pretty quickly, like that's going to catch up with you very quickly. Where if you're only doing it once or twice or you're doing a daredevil type stunt, like you only need to get away with it once or twice, and you can build a false sense of confidence.
When I was in Colorado, I let someone throw a dart at my head, and he fucking drilled it right in my head.
Yeah.
So yeah, don't do stupid shit.
But the point is there, right? With the live shows, you have the repetition. You can't convince yourself. There's less opportunity, I guess, to convince yourself that this is all fine.
I was going to say that when
have a near miss happen, and you interpret that in your brain as success,
that I do believe all of the Spider-Man stuff all happened in rehearsals. I don't believe any people were just falling and fucking getting hurt on stage in front of audiences.
Right.
So I don't know if I clarified that, but that was just a lot of rehearsal stuff that
and I think if you do any research on like the whole production had like overall cultural issues on how fast they were going and what they wanted to accomplish. And
it seemed like they just bit off more than they could chew, almost.
Maybe, yeah. Along that line. That's why live shows look so lame, because you can't move somebody that fast that often and not injure them, kind of a thing. So
for the trailer, it looked great.
Yeah.
Right. For that backflip and and that superhero landing, but to do that a bunch of times in a show, like
it happens in circus as well. It happens in the people get excited, and like the longevity of stuff isn't always on their mind.
Right. So what do you got? Anything that we should pay attention to? Anything after your little stint in New Orleans, or?
I'm actually finishing up some gigs, and then I'm moving on. I've been acquired by a performer flying company, and
wow,
awesome. I'm going to be returning to being nestled in the bosom of another company, not my own. And I no longer have to deal with all the things you have to deal with when you run your own business.
Nice.
And that'll be I'm moving on to be the safety and training director for one of the country's largest performer flying companies.
Well, congratulations, dude. That's awesome.
Wow, congrats.
So just focusing on risk assessments and a lot of the stuff we kind of talked about, like formalizing that for the company, and then also setting up their training program so that the people that work with them have a solid set of skills that they're able to replicate again and again. And ideally, I'll be there for a good while and maybe expand. Maybe we'll do more movie and TV stuff. Maybe we'll do more project management, more big projects, WrestleMania, and things like that.
That's awesome. Well, this episode doesn't air till like March, I think. So if
I'll be there.
If you can make it public, when we'll add it to the show notes. So when this does air, we can put it in there.
Right. Well, I'll say I'll be starting there in January, and if I make it all the way till March, I'll probably stick around.
Awesome. Did you say the company? Did it?
No. That's what I'm saying. By March, though, when we air this, we can add.
We
it
can
to
put
the
it in
show
the
notes.
Perfect.
Yeah, we can put it in the
show notes. Yeah. Look, I never wanted to be an independent person. I really like working on a team. I like to be surrounded by other people that are smart, and I like that we have a chance to geek out about being good at things. I would have been a really big fan of creating a little stunt team, and just like, how far do you guys want to go? How good do you want to be? That's kind of where my training came from, was to be on a team, and I'm looking forward to getting back with a group of fellow nerds
Very cool,
that are
man.
interested in doing how good can we be kind of stuff.
We'll have to have you back on season 2 to talk about that whole new experience.
It's just like, I'm in my office, it's all spreadsheets and paperwork, and nobody listens to me.
The podcast will be him like in a bathrobe with a coffee mug, feet up on the desk.
Look, I drew it. I drew the splat.
I drew it.
That's it.
Yeah.
Man, thank you so much for coming on and taking the time, even though I know you drove all day, morning, whatever, and now you're in your hotel. We appreciate you coming on, man. And support of the show.
This was great.
Of course.
I answered so many questions that I had.
I'm a big talker.
Thanks so much, man.
Yeah, man. That's awesome. Thank you so much, dude.
Of course. Glad to be back anytime.
Yeah.
Enjoy the rest of your time in New Orleans, bro.
Later. Film Fights with Friends is brought to you by Breakfall Studios. Executive producers Stephen Kepfer, Paul Veracci, Tiago Benedetti. Produced by Press Record Studios with Richard Butler, associate producers Becca GT and Jared DeCrose. Edited by Matthew Kaplowitz. Original music by Aru Luster.